Hey guys, RPG Guy here, and before we start, this is my first attempt at ever doing something like this, so let me know if there's any audio issues or problems that you guys notice, and if they're really big, I will redo this prologue just so you guys can hear it better. I've also been, suggestions that I was given was to do voice acting, which for my Gandalf voice or like a stiff kind of pseudo British voice. I chose against that just to see how things go. So hopefully it's okay. Let me know if there's any issues, and I will make changes as needed, either in future chapters, or I will redo this one for you guys. Thanks. Hope you enjoy. I'm not a professional writer, novelist, or author in any way, shape, or form. This novelization may contain grammatical errors and dialogue inconsistencies that conflict with the original source material. I'm also not a professional voice actor or reading specialist. I did the best I could and kept the best takes, so this is really just for the enjoyment of fans of the original source material and curious people. This work is technically classified as fan fiction and greatly expands upon the original source material. Please enjoy and support the official release. A novelization of Final Fantasy, fan-written and narrated by the RPG Guy. Prologue. Thunder cracked and boomed as rain fell down from the sky onto the cold, dead earth below. The wind blew violently and whistled loudly between the bombastic blasts of light from the dark clouds above. The nearly muted sounds of metal clashing echoed alongside the patter of rain. Along the moist, dead grass below, corpses of warriors lay strewn about, mangled in defeat. Bodies slain from bloodied bladed blows to completely burnt flesh. The field took on a horrific sight of a hellscape. In the distance, three figures could be seen only by the flashes of light brought down by the thunder as it strikes the ground indiscriminately. One of the men wore a lush surcoat of red with white trim that was held closed across the chest with gold belt buckles and black leather straps. At his upper chest, chainmail armor could be seen glistening from the rain along with his black leather boots and gloves. A long flowing red cape covered his back, and his face lay hidden in the shadows by a red cavalier hat decorated by a single, fully rain-soaked white feather held on by another thin, black leather belt. In his hand he was equipped with a single cutlass that he held with a strong yet complex posture. Standing near the red-clothed man was a woman who was far less intricately equipped for battle, just based on looks. She wore nothing more than a simple martial arts gi of sky blue with a white bandana covering the crown of her head. Simple yet flexible brown shoes made from burlap sack covered her feet, but were drenched from the rainfall itself. Unlike the man clad with sword and armor, the woman only had her fists up in a defensive posture, her knuckles bloodied. As both the man and the woman stood at the ready, they looked not more than 30 feet in front of themselves to see a man clad in armor darker than the moonless and starless night. Long, demon-like horns jutted out from the sides of the black helmet that covered the man's face in its entirety, except for the sight of two blood-red eyes. The pauldrons of his armor were shaped like demonic ram skulls, with small, glowing gemstones in the eye sockets, as they could be seen as a torn blue cape fluttered about in the wind. His body was covered from head to toe in black armor, his size massive compared to the foes who stood before him. He towered over the red-clothed man, over a head and a half at least, his body muscular as it supported all the weight of his massive armor, and he did so seemingly with ease. He was equipped with a singular massive greatsword that he seemed to hold effortlessly with one arm, as he gripped it with his claw-like gauntlet, his other hand seemingly free of any burden outside of his armor. The three combatants squared off with each other in silence, motionless as they stood, not flinching as the crashing of lightning blasted loudly across the sky. It happened as the darkness began to settle back in when the man in red began to take his free hand and shove it out in front of him, his sword-equipped arm beside him resting. The martial artist sped forward towards the hulking armored man, with her fists pulled back far, as her feet moved quickly, sending her across the battlefield with great haste. The massive armored figure stood motionlessly as the monk flung her fist forward towards the head of the armored man, bashing the armored man hard. The sound of raw meat striking a firm metal surface, splatting loudly as the figure stumbled back from the strike. At that moment, the man in red's hand began to glow a deep blue, as a small smirk could be seen below the shadow made by the rim of his hat. Suddenly, 3 large icicles shot out from his hand and darted their way towards the large armored man. His eyes suddenly fixing on the incoming attack, the armored man pulls up his massive greatsword as one of the icicles shatters against his blade, another one being deflected by his other armored hand, while the final icicle shattering against his chest as the concussion of the collision forced him to slide back against the ground. Though his body still remained upright and undamaged, it was enough force to push him backwards. Though struck with such powerful blows from the masterful monk and the mystical red mage, it didn't seem to cause much damage to his body. Though stunned, the giant armored man slowly regained his posture after each attack and stared ominously back towards the brave warriors. Seeming to not have struck her foe with enough force, in frustration and rage, the monk let out a primeval scream that seemed to overpower the massively loud sounds of rain and lightning that filled the air, as she sprang forward towards the giant armored man with the whole of her body. Her fists in rapid succession began to strike the armored man, each strike banging loudly as blood and even sinew began to fall from her knuckles. After several unblocked strikes, the armored man fell to a single knee, his head facing down towards the ground. The monk then began to release a volley of roundhouse kicks to his body. While kneeling, he still seemed larger than her just in sheer size. Each kick echoed out, each blow seeming harder and more damaging than the last. Seeing the mild effects of her blows, the monk then released a monstrous spinning hook kick right to the armored man's helmeted face, causing his whole head to turn hard to the side. There was a moment of silence and stillness after the clash of martial blows versus the thick, plated armor. The large armor head slowly began to face back towards the monk, the red eyes seeming to narrow as a deep, guttural growl begins to push out from behind the armored helmet. The monk's body, however, was spent. Her posture dipped down as she bled from her hands uncontrollably, her knuckles and fingers seeming devoid of actual skin and flesh. Dark, bloodied spots along the legs of her gi showed as they oozed off color from the blue-shaded material covering her from her legs. Even one of her burlap shoes had fallen into pieces, with only the cuff of her ankle being the last remnant of her right foot covering. She breathed heavily as her grunts were hoarse and heavy with fatigue and frustration. It was in a swift motion that the left claw-like gauntlet reached out and grabbed the monk by the throat firmly, the sounds of strain jutting from her mouth. The armored figure slowly began to lift her body up from the ground. She stood upon exclusively by her neck, her arms flailing wearily against the massive armored arm that held her up. She found herself nearly unable to breathe, the feeling of her throat being in a vice, as no matter how hard she struggled, she could feel it getting tighter and tighter. It was in that moment when her ability to suck down air ceased, a loud singular crack, followed by a violent jerk of the armored man's arm, and her body became lifeless as he held her. "Kalara!" the red mage shouted, horrified by the last stand he witnessed, his sword rising at the ready as he looked upon the sight of the death of a masterful warrior with concern. Fighting through the tears of a lost comrade and trying hard to be steadfast, not to show fear or doubt. He kept his eyes set on the armor-clad man who stood holding the body of the fallen monk out in front of him. Without warning, the armored man fiercely threw the body several yards towards the red mage as the monk's body came crashing down atop him, knocking him to the ground. The red mage, caught off guard by the attack, quickly attempted to push the body off him, as he could hear the deep thuds of the armored man's footsteps coming his way slowly, the sound of earth being moved as he dragged the long greatsword behind him along the ground. On the ground, the red mage seemed to be in a state of panic. Finding his sword on the ground beside him, he quickly reaches out and grasps in his hands as he sharply turns his attention back towards the man in black armor. It seemed almost to be quick. It seemed almost too quick to be real. The giant man towering over his exposed body as he held his massive greatsword above him. As he swung towards the prone red mage, he found himself only striking soil, sending dirt into every direction, as the red mage quickly rolled out from the path of the massive sword just in time. The red mage, quickly getting back to his feet, turned to face the giant man again as he held his sword at the ready. He knew that he had to collect himself, not to underestimate his foe, and to not fear him if he wanted to survive this onslaught of a man. He had to focus, think of a means to get in some kind of lethal blow, to put this monster down once and for all. It would take more than just great swordsmanship, but something more well-conceived and tactical, to get some sort of mortal strike past the armored man's defenses. Now focused, he could keep his eye on the armored man, trying to better observe his every move. He saw the armored man prepare to thrust his blade towards him, and instead of cowering back, the red mage was ready. The large sword came barreling towards him as he quickly put his own weapon between him and the massive blade, trying to hold the sharp edge at bay from moving horizontally towards him. Using both of his hands on the sword, he pushed the big blade back as he found himself sprinting right up to the face of the massive man. Freeing his left hand from the grip of his sword, he placed it in front of the eyes of the armored man as a bright flash of blinding light shot out from his palm. A deep and rage-filled snarl bellowed out from the armored man. The red eyes closed as one of the armored man's hands came up to protect his now blinded eyes. In that moment, the red mage attacked, slicing between the plates of massive armor the man wore, trying desperately to find a weakness. However, the attempt only held off the armored man for but a moment, as the sound of flesh and metal could be heard. The red mage's body seeming to instantly grow limp as the wide blade of the greatsword pierced his gut. In a sudden shake, the cavalier hat fell from the red mage's head onto the ground, revealing the soft, contoured face of a handsome, seemingly young man. His hair ashen white when the sky was lit by the crashes of thunder, his ears pointed at their tips, and his skin almost pale white. The armored man's red eyes came back into view between his visor as he looked upon the red mage, who seemed to be no more than a rag doll on a skewer. A deep chuckle murmured out from him. His head tilted slowly to the side as if eager to see the life leave the eyes of the elf he had recently impaled. Upon observation, he noticed the red mage's mouth moving as if he were mumbling something, praying to a god or whatever nonsense. The armored man moved closer to the red mage's face, yearning to see his last moments of life slip away from him. A dark green light began to glow out from the red mage's hand, finally in view of the giant armored man as he looked over to see that he had cast a spell. Before the armored man could react, he felt a sharp blow to the side of his body. What was an almost lifeless face of an elf slowly began to warp a crooked smile. The red mage had stabbed the giant armored man in the space between his chest plate and back plate with what appeared to be a mithril dagger. All 12 inches of metal had been plunged deep into his body. The blade then suddenly turned in him to prevent the wound from closing. The giant armored man lets go of his grip on his greatsword, letting the red mage fall to the muddied ground as the armored man stumbled backwards. his deep and penetrating voice screaming out in pain, almost sounding like a demonic howl. It was in that instant the deep red eyes looked down to see blood gushing from the wound as he pulled the dagger out from his own body. Cornelius free, the world saved, and you, Garland, fell not just by the sword, but by your own arrogance, thinking you could rule as a god amongst men. But like all mortals, you will bleed out, and you too will die. The red mage says, staggering every few words at a time, blood seeping from his mouth, the sword still penetrating his lower stomach. He was using the last of his magic to hold back not just the pain, but death itself. Pathetic mortal, this is not the end, but only the beginning, as I will live again, endlessly, no matter how many fools attempt to smite me. I was tasked to rule as a god, and nothing will stop me, Garland says, his deep and rough voice belting out from behind his helmet. A deep laughter begins to ring out as the rain slowly begins to dissipate. Garland's body begins to dissolve as if it were dust in the wind, his voice still belting out maniacal laughter. No, it can't be, the red mage says, as with his last ounce of strength he reaches into his right pocket of his the right pocket of his blood-splattered red surcoat. As he slumps over, his body finally lifeless, a small crystal, radiating a deep green light, falls from his hands and into the mud. The bright green light slowly begins to dim as the haunting laughter echoes out of existence, and in only a matter of time the green crystal's light burns out, the crystal now dark and void of any color or sparkle. The wind suddenly howled as the rain had ceased. Not a single body moved as life seemed to be absent across the battlefield. Time slowly trudged on, and yet stagnated strangely, as if the natural world itself hesitated for a brief moment. The howling wind suddenly became more violent. Rain poured heavily down from the sky as it began to burn the cold flesh off the bodies it rained down upon. Then the earth began to slowly pull down the bodies of the deceased as they seemed to vanish beneath the soil. As the wind dissipated, the rain trickled away, and the earth lay dormant. A slow, bellowing heat poured over the battlefield, turning what was left of the land into nothing but sand and dust as far as the eye could see. There was no sun, no moon, no stars, no clouds, no blue sky. Nothing but a void of darkness and white sand. No life, no sound. Nothing was left. And this was a chapter of a novelization of Final Fantasy. This is my first time ever creating a fan fiction, and on top of that, this is the first time I've ever narrated one out loud. I'm still learning how to do this, and hopefully it appealed to some of you. Give it a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, give me any criticism, good and bad, and I will try to get the next episode out as soon as possible. Thank you guys for stopping by. We'll see you next time.